Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, EVP of Products and Services here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I'm super excited to have Jack Flanagan and Jason Griffith from Tennessee Retina as our co-guests today. Jack is the COO/CFO of the organization, and Jason is the lone IT manager. So as a consequence, they work quite closely together. During our conversation, we get into the nature of that back and forth, how each of them thinks about IT in the context of the business of Tennessee Retina, and what they worry about when it comes to technology and their employees. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jack Flanagan and Jason Griffith. Jack Flanagan, Jason Griffith, welcome to Cut the Shit. Thanks for joining me today.
Bryan, pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, so before we dive into the meat of the discussion, how about we start with each of you giving us an example of the most interesting use of technology or maybe a hack that you've seen or heard about recently that you've either seen it from, maybe from a client or from a colleague, or that you've even, experienced on your own. So Jack, why don't you start?
Wow, great question. Outside of healthcare, right? This can be personal experience as well.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, it's up to you.
I'm definitely tracking virtual reality and the Oculus. I have a friend who has a teenage boy who bought an Oculus for like some ungodly amount of money. And while it's a super cool toy, apparently they've made it even pricier. And now they're trying to sell it as a work product that professionals can use in the workspace. Going to be very interesting to see how that evolves over time, because I see it as a game. I just can't see it as something that would help, an average worker working at a desk.
Right. Yeah, that obviously the jury's out on that, and we'll see. It's maybe the first step in that direction. We don't know. Feels like we've been hearing about VR and AR for a while, but it may be, maybe the time is coming. I guess we'll see. So, Jason, how about you?
Yeah, the ChatGPT, it amazes me how some people are using it. They're writing code, they're writing different applications, they're writing term papers. It's amazing the different uses that people are scavenging for it. So I'm interested to see how it evolves and see how deep it can go, because some people are getting some really interesting results from it, and then they're also getting some raps done. I saw the Constitution done as a rap song in the style of Cardi B. So
there you go.
That technology can go.
I mean, it's like the old days when I was a kid, right? We had Schoolhouse Rock, right? There was that's how you learned civics in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. So maybe this is the new version of that. We'll just assume that's the case. Yeah, the schools I think are pretty up in arms. They're trying to figure out how to deal with this. So, as usual, technology always gets applied by the kids, and I would say the kids these days, but that's the kids always, right? How do I figure out how to make things simpler and quicker? So they're gonna have to figure that out for sure. All right, well let's get into it. So before we get started, how about each of you give us a quick thumbnail sketch on your background and kind of how you got started working in the medical field. So Jason, why don't you start?
Started in the medical field, 1992, 150 years ago or so, the latter part of the last century. Really just started out as a nurse tech in a hospital, and then got a job with the ophthalmology group in Texas. And of course, then 9/11 happened, and joined the Army and did my stint there, did a few tours over there, and then got a civilian job with the ophthalmology group on Fort Campbell, and then got in with Tennessee Retina. That's where I've been for the last 10 years. Started out as a ophthalmic photographer, and then just kind of garnered a knowledge for the network and the systems within Tennessee Retina, and just essentially kind of took over the IT management of the practice. So,
got it. Did you have your experience in the military? Was that medical related or was it non-medical?
No, I was a 11 Bravo, a infantryman, my first tour, and then did logistics the last 2 tours. So
Gotcha.
I realized that getting shot at was the dumbest job in the Army. So I switched really fast.
In the realm of who would have thunk it statements, Jason, thanks for that. That's I feel like I spend most of my days making statements that are patently obvious, and so that's one of those ones right there. I have to agree with you. And we got a bunch of ex-military guys that work at Plow, and I'm pretty sure they'd all agree with you.
I would hope so.
So Jack, how about you? Give us a quick sketch.
Yeah, so I was kind of a finance weenie for the first part of my career. I was a former Marine, and in one of my last tours, I actually got to be a company commander in a shock trauma platoon, which is kind of combat medicine, and spent a couple of years with a medical battalion. And when I got out of the military, after I retired, when I got out of the military, I had all this finance experience. And I also had a little bit of healthcare experience, and I started looking for a CFO job, got a CFO job at a medical group, and kind of from there, this was in San Diego, and went from there to managed care to a specialty system based around a pediatrics hospital, then to a large health system, and then landed here in Tennessee Retina as a working inside of a specialty field. And so it's been very unique for us because it's an interesting, it's like a big company, but at the same time, there's only 10 doctors, whereas other groups you've got 200 doctors in lots of different locations. So you have to get really good at the same thing and really be able to handle volume. So that's my background.
Gotcha. Excellent. So a little bit of a question related to that, given that both of you have shared military backgrounds or both have military backgrounds, you share that. Can each of you give me a sense of how that experience prepared you for the work you do today? Jason, you want to start?
Sure. The logistics part of it probably had more of an impact on what I do now. Just managing assets and controlling, or not controlling, but learning how to utilize people in the right place, in the right position, utilize the right assets in the right place, in the right position. Combat infantry didn't really. There sometimes has to be some hand-to-hand combat in the medical field, especially when you're dealing with doctors. So I get to bring that in every now.
Gotcha. You have to give a throat punch every now and then, right? I mean, just to yeah. I mean, for sure.
I try to limit it. I try not to. I just try to limit it to that Bruce Lee 1-inch punch, and
right.
Not full force, but sometimes I have to draw back and go 2 inches. So. But it's effective. It is effective.
Got it. Jack, how about you?
Yeah. Gosh, it's funny. For all those years, you think, oh, I'm in the military, I know how to lead people. And then you get out into the civilian world and you realize that telling people what to do is very different than leading people forward in a vision. And it was really easy as an officer to tell people what to do. It's much harder to convince, a group of people, hey, this is something good for all of us. Let's march forward on this. So I don't know that it directly translates. I think people put a kind of a moniker on you if you've been former military, but I think some of that dissolves away quickly when you get into all of the nuanced interpersonal relationships in the management team as well as with the employees. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it directly relates.
That's fair. It's funny. One of the follow-up questions I was going to ask is where's it been helpful and maybe other areas where not so much. And so you sort of took that already and answered. So you took my question and that's perfect. Thanks very much. So I realized I failed to ask before we go any further. Jack, why don't you tell us about Tennessee Retina, what it is and what it is that you guys do?
Sure. So it is a subspecialty. We are kind of a subspecialty of general ophthalmology. A lot of people go and see their ophthalmologist, but retina surgeons and medical retina doctors, in addition to going through medical school and going through residency and getting board certified in ophthalmology, they also do a 2-year fellowship beyond ophthalmology, and then they are able to practice retina medicine. And remember that the retina is the kind of the back part of the eye. It's kind of like a piece of wallpaper that sits on a curved wall. And when there are things that happen on the back part of the eye, from chronic diseases and also from sometimes from trauma, then these surgeons are able to actually go in and help hopefully repair and treat through various medications, kind of treat some of the some of the things that happen to the retina. Whereas the front part of the eye, the part that everyone sees, the iris, the cornea, all of that, that's really done by general ophthalmologists. So there aren't a lot of retina surgeons throughout the United States. The groups tend to be fairly small. I think we're a fairly medium-sized to large group. We've got 10 doctors, about 160 employees, and we're in 8 locations, but most of them are very centralized in one geographic area. And that's what Tennessee Retina does. We've been doing it probably 35 years. Used to be that there was one retina surgeon in a town, and uh, our founding physician, Dr. Guto, started in Nashville way back in like 78 or something like that. And then he hired Dr. O, who is now our president. So in the last 30 years, this practice has evolved from 2 doctors and maybe 6 or 8 staff, and we've grown kind of exponentially over that time, or I guess incrementally over that time. And now we're in 8 locations, stretching all the way down to Columbia, Tennessee, up to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and then kind of east almost all the way to Knoxville. So geographically, we're getting pretty big, and patient volume. We see about 28,000 patients. Most of them have chronic conditions. It's not like most times you don't go to the retina surgeon and then get healed and just go away. Most of the diseases that we treat are chronic conditions that we have to manage for, potentially the rest of their lives.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. That's helpful. I honestly, and full disclaimer, I mentioned it in the intro, but Plow, we are a service provider to Tennessee Retina, so I'm familiar with both of these gentlemen on the phone, and somewhat familiar with the business. But I just learned something there, so that was helpful to me, because I thought it was more of a procedure-based surgical thing, like you guys went in, fixed the eye, and then moved on to the next person, and I did not realize as much of it was chronic. Fortunately, that means, good for me, I guess at this point in my life, it means I don't have retina problems. I'm not that familiar with it. And no offense to you guys, but I hope I never am, right? That would be good for me. But that may not be the case. And if it is, that happens, it's good to know that there are people out there that can help, like you guys. All right. So since we got you both here with Jack from kind of the business and finance side of the house, and Jason from the IT ops side, I thought we'd focus a discussion on, not completely, but somewhat on the interrelationship between the 2 areas of the company. And so I'd like to start out by asking you a question, Jack. How much time do you spend thinking about IT? And is that more or less than you think it should be?
I only spend 3% of my time thinking about IT, honestly. But I worry if worrying is thinking, then then in the evenings before I go to sleep and when I'm driving to work, I sit there and think, oh man, who just crashed through our firewall, and who's stealing what from us, and when will we find out about it, and how much is it going to cost us? So even though I don't spend a lot of my day thinking about IT, I worry about IT more so than most other parts of the business, because the ramifications when you do it wrong are extremely costly and extremely damaging to our patients. And so, we're blessed to have a guy like Jason here running our IT department. Prior to Jason, we had it almost entirely outsourced. We had a manager who was kind of managing it, but didn't have the technical skills to do that. And Jason brings that knowledge, but we've always relied heavily on, because of our size, we've always relied heavily on a managed service partner to be able to do that. So yeah, I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I worry a lot about it.
That's fair. Yeah, I think, I would say if you don't worry about security, almost in any business, but particularly in a regulated business like healthcare, right? Then you're probably kidding yourself about the situation, right? That'd be somewhat naive if you weren't worrying about it. So, all right. So Jason, I want to flip it to you, and the question's a little different. How much time do you spend thinking about the business of Tennessee Retina, and is that more or less than you think it should be?
Yeah, I'm like Jack. About 3%. I don't, because it's the numbers thing. I don't. I'm not interested in. As long as that paycheck hits every couple of weeks, that's usually the extent of my concern about it. But having said that, we're in a very unique time period in healthcare where private equity is really making things. It's making the landscape a lot different as far as healthcare goes. It's not the same animal that it was when I was in a hospital setting back in 1992. So So it's different. You wonder, which flag you're gonna to wake up to the next morning. You just don't know sometimes, because it was kind of a shock to our system when RCA came in and became part of us, or we became part of them actually. You just it's uncertain. You're uncertain about things. So until something like that happens, I really don't. The business side of it, as long as the computers can talk to each other and the network's up, I'm good.
Okay, that's fair. So how often do you guys talk? And maybe more specifically, how often do you talk about IT in a strategic way versus, sort of a problem solving tactical way? And Jack, why don't you go first?
Well, I mean, we have regularly scheduled meetings. We have, hard-coded one-on-ones every 2 weeks. Most times we're not so operationally busy that we miss those. So most times we meet. The nice thing about it is there's a level of trust where Jason knows that I'm not trying to do his job, and Jason knows my job is to just remove barriers from him, from his pathway. And I know that I can't do his job, and so I want him to go do it because he has this intellectual curiosity. And so we meet quite regularly. And I would say, gosh, this is a hard question. I would say that more than 50% of our time is thinking strategically on IT issues, because yes, you need the basic block and tackling, but we trust Plow to be able to do a lot of that for us. And also Jason just hired a person, a direct hire, to be able to help us on like the desktop support, kind of like keeping the blood flowing in the patient. So when Jason and I get together, we don't want to start talking operationally about plans that he's going to lay down unless we know what the strategic long-term smart investment is. So most of our time is, I think more than half of our time is strategy. And it's because you got to know where you're going before you figure out where the first step should be and where you start spending the money.
Jason?
I completely agree. It's most of what we talk about is long term. What are we doing today to set us up for a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now? What's it going to look like, and what are the things that we're doing today? How are they going to affect that? And I like that because we're finally starting to get into a place to where we feel comfortable. You never say, well, I'll just put it on cruise control and everything will be good. But we're starting to feel more and more comfortable about the basis of our operations. Just the networking and the solid infrastructure of just our operation. So it allows us to really look forward and to think about what's going to happen as we continue to expand and as our patient volumes continue to increase, and as we start to look at new locations and networking within those, and how to improve those network connections, and how to increase communication. So I like those discussions. I like having those discussions because if you're not thinking about the future, you're probably not going to get there.
You're already behind, right?
That's right.
For sure. All right. So Jack, given that technology obviously is critical to the work that you guys do, understanding a little bit about the applications and what's going on with the imaging and how critical that is to the nature of the work that the docs do. How did you go about learning the tech IT side? How did you do that?
Asking a lot of questions, and you get to ask a lot of questions when you control the purse strings. And so if your managed service provider can explain to you in plain terms why it's a good investment and why it's going to help you operationally, then you learn from that. And fortunately or unfortunately, part of my job is to take, complex business issues and boil them down for 10 doctors who are not tech savvy or aren't business savvy. And you have to be able to give it to them in bullets and say, this is why we're doing this. And if you can't do that, that means that you either don't know what's going on, or your salesperson or your managed service provider hasn't done a good job of prepping you.
Right. That makes sense. You mentioned the doctors and thinking about this is something we know is an issue sometimes inside healthcare organizations. How much time do you guys spend educating employees and doctors about either the use of core technologies and And I don't mean the retinal scanning stuff. I mean, we'll put that to the side, right? That's part and parcel of the work they do. But in terms of the basics, right? The tools that you're equipping them with to do the job outside of the core, sort of service delivery. Jason, why don't you take that first? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. As much as we do, I don't think we'll ever be able to do enough, because one of the things that I find interesting is that the biggest point of failure usually is the end user, and so to be able to educate them enough as far as being able to utilize the core technologies, the opportunity is difficult because we do have multiple satellite locations, and when we're inside the office or when those doors are open, we're working. So there's very little time to provide that direct education, unless it's through email or some kind of webinar. So to give them those tools, I don't think it'll ever be enough. I would rather have an overeducated end user than anything else. But I just don't think that's a realistic thought.
And I guess, Jack, I'd flip it to you, but then maybe try to clarify a bit. Where do you get the sense from the troops that they feel like they don't know enough? And maybe that's a little bit of a different way of asking the question.
Yeah. Let's separate the two. Applications that we use in the business flow, that actually works because you infuse that into the training process. Right. So all of the people that are working on the floor, in order to do their job, they have to figure out how to use the practice management system. They have to figure out how to use the EHR. They have to pull up images. Yeah. That's easy because they have to do it day to day.
And they do it every day. It's integral to the job, right? I mean, you can't get away from it.
And they just pick it up naturally. What's challenging is when we try to, on the non-clinical side, bring out some great capability that would really advance how we organize, how we communicate, and how we do our day-to-day jobs. And the technology just sits there. We've bought it. Everyone's got it on their desktop and they're not freaking using it because they don't know how, and we never have time in the day to train all the end users. And so, very interested to tell you a quick story. So we spent a lot of money. Our former MSA convinced us that we need to move from desktop version to Office 365. So we bit the bullet. We invested in it. We put it on everyone's desktop. And darn if they just didn't. All they went in and wanted to do was use email and web browser. That was it, right? But then what happened was what Jason and I think learned was, if you take away or move their cheese and they have to use it, dang, they get really quick and smart about using the new technology. So 3 years ago, as we implemented, we're like, we're going to use Teams and we're going to set up permissioning and everyone's getting on a SharePoint. We're going to do this department by department. And it just languished for like a year. All of a sudden, Jason says, hey, you know what? This F drive here is 7 years old. It's going to die someday, Jack. And I'm worried that everyone who's using it is going to come into work one day and go, where did all my stuff go? And so Jason and I agreed, and we said, you know what? Let's take away their cheese. Let's tell them that we're killing the F drive in like 3 months, and you better figure out how to move all that stuff to SharePoint. Darn if everyone didn't figure it out, right? Like now we don't. I don't even know if the F drive's still plugged in. Jason, is it even plugged in? I think it is.
It's still there, but it's not getting a lot of use.
We might need to talk about that then. for that worry thing that you were mentioning earlier, right? What's sitting in there? So.
Prior to COVID, everyone was walking into the conference room and sitting in a chair talking to one another. And now it doesn't matter where you work. I mean, we've got offices spread all over Tennessee. Many of our senior people have laptops. Jason has done a great job of pushing that technology to handheld devices as well. And so now all of a sudden, nobody meets in person. It is rare to go into a conference room and sit there and talk to a human being. Like, everyone communicates. So did we have Teams training? No. But did the staff all figure out, hey, Teams is a heck of a lot more efficient than right. Scheduling a conference room and walking down the hall and bringing your laptop and
learn by using, right? Yeah.
Yeah, by using and it's fascinating because I'm a planner and I'm an organizer, so I want to drive change, but it's almost like what I figured out with IT is to just sit back and let them figure out that they have to use that system. I don't know what the right solution is.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of, necessity is the mother of all invention, or all, I forget the phrase, but I think you know what I'm talking about, right? If you have to do something, you'll figure it out, right? And I mean, sometimes that can be painful for people, but if they, that it's also, you guarantee that they're going to get there, right? Especially when you're talking about things like, I mean, because let's face it, Teams is pretty easy to use. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a few things about it that are kind of quirky, but it's not real complicated to figure out how to do a web meeting. I mean, my mother at 72 can knock that sucker out in no time, right? And she's your average 72-year-old. She's not particularly tech savvy. I mean, I think she's probably better than some, but you get what I'm saying. Like, she has no problem with that stuff. So, but the first time you mentioned it to her, it freaked her out, right? She wouldn't have done it if she probably didn't have to. I mean, this was back to the same point. So now that I've given my mother a hard time and she's not here, I guess we'll go on to the next question. So, Jack, you mentioned early on about worry, and you talked about your own worry, but what is it from your all's perspective? What do your employees and doctors worry about most when it comes to technology? I mean, and are they worrying about the right things? And Jason, why don't you start first? You may be more on the front lines, and then Jack can talk a little bit maybe more at the executive level.
I think from our clinicians, from our physicians, their immediate concern is always going to be connectivity and access to data. They want to have that real time access to 100% of the data all the time from everywhere. That's probably their biggest concern. I don't think that the network vulnerability is on the forefront of their minds because I believe that they have the confidence in what we're doing behind the scenes to eliminate a lot of those threats. So I think they can rest easy on that. But they're, like I said, their biggest concern because of the nature of the business, they're seeing patients
right.
all the time, and
without it, they can't do their job. Is really what
exactly. You just can't make an effective diagnosis or treat effectively without that. So I think that's probably their biggest concern.
Jack, how about at the kind of the senior level?
I think they worry that IT is a spending black hole. Like, when Jason and I come to them, they may trust that we have a really good idea or it's something that we really need to do, but I don't know that they've got a solid grasp for how quickly technology turns over and how just to keep pace with technology, it has to be an important part of your budget. You have to spend operational money on it. And what you're doing is you're risk avoiding in one part. And I don't know that the doctors, because you can't touch it, and because the only thing they see is, this laptop with a little monitor that takes a picture of them, or if they're in the exam lane, all they see is form software and a all-in-one computer, and they know it's sitting out there in the cloud. They have no concept of how much is sitting out there in the cloud, how much it takes to maintain it, back it up, how much are we paying to the vendors. And so they just see IT as, God, we've got to buy more of those things. Why? The switches are only 7 years old. Why do we have to buy a new switch? Or that server's only 7, or this person's, I mean, I remember at one time our life cycle maintenance plan was to replace computers between 7 and 9 years. That was the plan.
Yeah,
so strategically, it's really tough as a.
I'm not even sure you can call that planned obsolescence. I don't even know what that is. So,
it was break. It was break.
I think
it's
just called cheap.
It was break fix. Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, for sure. Did they?
Yeah, for a while, what we said was, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to buy a new one, and then we're going to take this other one and put it on the shelf, and that'll be our spare. And they loved that concept because we have a couple of doctors who refuse to throw anything away, right? Like they're just like, don't put that in the dumpster. I know that's a piece of optical equipment that we haven't used in 25 years and it's been in the storeroom, but that may have some value. I don't know why, but and so when you say, oh, I've got this, this switch that's really worth $0, but we're going to put it in the IT room, but I need a new one. They're like, oh, okay, well, that's good. At least we're not throwing away the old one. It's reverse logic, but yeah, it works. I mean, it works.
Has from a spending mix, has the percentage of spending on IT, how much has that changed in the past decade at Tennessee Retina? I know you haven't been there that full time, but you probably have some visibility. Did it used to be 5 or 10% and now it's 20, or I just was curious, do the doctors look at it that way?
No, we don't look at it as a percentage of revenue. When we compare to other retina practices within Retina Consultants of America, it's definitely something that we benchmark all of our operating expenses on. But the owners, the doctors don't look at it that way.
Okay.
We as managers do.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I would. That's how I'm thinking of it. But that's
Definitely not 20%. I will tell you though, it's very interesting. Just because a company's spending a lot on IT doesn't mean they have really good IT. And
It could
by
be the
that,
opposite,
this
actually.
is kind of the yeah. This is they might not know what to spend it on, so they just throw money at everything.
Yep.
What's interesting, and I'm going to brag on Jason a little bit. What was crazy was when we used to have an admin manager, and the admin manager used to run the IT department, but she didn't have the skill sets to be able to do that, so she didn't know what was needed. She didn't have the vision, right? We just talked about vision. So Jason comes in, and in his first year, he just keeps hitting home runs. He's like, and this is this intellectual curiosity that he has. He sits there and says, well, we're paying this much, and I think I've got a better solution. And if we do this, then we're going to save $8,000 a month. And my jaw drops to the ground. I'm like, wait a minute, how much are we going to save? And it's like, I don't even know that we got to ask the doctors to be able to do that and so what happened was he kept hitting home
Probably
runs.
not.
Probably not. I think we actually did package it up just because if
Well, you
the
want
whole
to
thing
know.
blows
You
up,
don't want
we
to
wanna
just
be
you
like,
don't,
hey, we
you
told
don't,
you
I mean,
guys.
yeah, you don't want to just let that go by, right? That's not one. Oh, by the way, we saved it. We saved a bunch of money, but we didn't feel like we'd tell you, right?
Yeah. And so what Jason did in the first probably 18 months of him taking over this department was going through, and it's just that common sense approach to finding technical solutions. And then that's 90% of it. And then the 10% is, okay, let's be fiscally savvy about this. And so I mean, I'm a big fan of Jason's because when he came in, nothing better than go to the CFO and say, you're spending less and I'm going to get you a better product. That's really easy. Now, those big wins that he got in the first 18 months, he's not going to be able to replicate that all the time.
Right. I mean, at some point you shouldn't be able to, right? It's like anything. If you optimize the system, at some point there's only you're going to get to the you'll start to flatten out, right? There's just not as much juice left to squeeze. But that's okay. I mean that that everyone should be realistic. Not that everybody is realistic, but they should be, right? So, all right. Well, let's follow on that just a little bit. So, Jack, I just asked you one, but I asked you another one because I think it kind of sort of fits in. As we think about from a financial perspective, how beneficial, if at all, and I use that I use this that if at all on purpose, has the move to cloud-based technologies been for Tennessee Retina?
Oh, I think it's been hugely beneficial. I think for us, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but I don't think we have any software applications that we use in our business processes that are PC or server based anymore. I'm not aware of. And if they are, they're not a critical business process for us. We've diligently moved to cloud-based computing. The trick is, I personally think the trick is, there's a lot of ways to get things in the cloud. Some of them are not cost effective, or some of them look like a good deal.
This is why I'm asking, because there's a good bit of buyer's remorse out there in the world when it comes to cloud technologies, right? And that's actually not a knock on cloud technologies so much as it's not necessarily the solution for everything, or it can be done incorrectly too, right? Those two problems are distinct, or well, not always. Sometimes they go together, but they're definitely distinct. So I was just curious what y'all's experience was with that, and particularly from sort of the financial perspective. Obviously, operationally, it simplifies some things, particularly if you've got multi locations, right? So you're not having to manage install-based systems at 8 locations, where, if something, if the server breaks down at Bowling Green, somebody's got to go on site to do something, right? I mean, as long as you got connectivity, you should be good, right? You can do redundancy with the data center or with the cloud solution you couldn't do before. So those are obvious. I meant more kind of from the financial side. Has it been, has moving that to an OpEx, has that been a good thing for you guys? Is that fit into the strategy for Tennessee Retina?
Well,
because that's not always the case for some people either, right? Because you could buy stuff as capital and as capital expense and amortize it out, and what I'm, as a CFO, I know you know what I'm talking about. So
yeah, it's a really good question, because OpEx versus CapEx, sometimes accountants can kind of run down into a rabbit hole, and they're trying to solve some kind of accounting pros and cons over some time continuum, when it really should be more about how quickly will that asset's value erode, and whether you're going to be stuck in a life cycle maintenance. Whereas if you can get something into the cloud, you don't have to constantly worry about life cycle for us. Now that being said, I don't think that's something that Jason and I worry too much about at OpEx versus CapEx. What's very interesting, though, Jason mentioned that we joined Retina Consultants of America about a year and a half ago. What's beautiful about joining a private equity backed organization like that, a couple things. First of all, they do the heavy lift on some of the big things that you need strategically that maybe either you didn't have the economies of scale to do as a single practice, but you can definitely do as like 35 practices nationwide. And then financially, the incentives get a little perverse because depending upon which backer you get, they want to invest capital in your medical practice because they know that small capital, when they have a low cost of capital, they can leverage that into much higher EBITDA, which then all of a sudden becomes a sellable benefit to them 5 years down the road.
They have to invest, right? That's what a private equity fund. That's what a private equity fund is. It's cash to invest for growth. Right?
What was interesting for us was we went into 2022 thinking, oh, this is fantastic. Instead of going to the owners and begging for capex, we just have to do a business justification and we can put all this into our capital budget. RCA was fantastic at supporting that because they know that that's a really good investment. But what was interesting for us was that Jason and I, it's not like we ran to the bank and just bought a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't need. We were still really, really smart about, okay, but wait a minute, let's prioritize these capital expenditures, and let's put the money where we get the highest patient benefit, right? Or the highest productivity increase for the workforce. And so if you're with a private equity company that truly knows how to manage leverage capital, and they don't get in the weeds of telling you how to spend your money, it's a wonderful experience because you have the ability to leverage your balance sheet now. As a finance guy, that's what I think of is let me leverage the balance sheet and we can go places there. And so when I think of CapEx now, I think of it more as first, what's going to most benefit the patient, and second, what's most going to benefit the business. And then, but third, I think about it as, oh, who's going to be footing the bill? Because if I can push this to CapEx and it doesn't affect my EBITDA, I want that because that's why they joined the partnership, was to bring that capital to us. So in a private equity world, you got to know who you're going to go into business with, and you got to make sure that their interests are aligned with yours. If they are, it's a beautiful thing like we have, but we've heard stories of other practices that have gone to a different type of private equity partner, and they get really perverse incentives where they start doing just like not great fiscal decisions because the internal motivation isn't about the patient experience. It's more about trying to protect EBITDA. I know that's kind of a geeky way of answering it, but
no, that's exactly what I was after. Because the at least in the IT world, right? The cloud was, I mean, it's probably the biggest. I mean, there's no question, it's the biggest innovation of the past 15 or 20 years, right? And so, and there's a lot of zealots and a lot of enthusiasm for it for good reason. But there also tends to be a little bit of a Pollyanna about it that, oh, every time you move anything to the cloud, right, it's going to be better for you. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be faster. And that's not true, right? I mean, just because nothing is that simple, right? There is no such thing. That presents it as a magic bullet. And we've got some customers that have had some really bad experiences doing, lift and shifts to the cloud or trying to use it for certain things that really didn't make a lot of sense for their business. So, and we are we sell cloud technologies. We love them, but it's just like anything else. It's a tool, and it's got to be applied to the right problem. So I was just curious about y'all's experience with that, because I figured, knowing enough about the nature of your business, you had to have moved from on-prem to the cloud with that imaging technology at some point. I don't remember. I know Zeiss is. I don't remember when all that happened, but I know that's happened in the past 10 years, maybe even in the past 5. I'm not sure. So I figured it was a big deal for you guys. So. All right, so just a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. I want to give you, you guys have a real job to do, so I want to let you get back to it. When you think about, and Jason, this is a question for you, what's the biggest challenge you face IT-wise when you think about helping Tennessee Retina be successful?
I think it's just the advancing technologies, the speed at which things advance. You want to grab onto the coattails of those really fast and just hold on and bring everybody with you, but that's hard to do. It's hard to do in an environment like we have, because you can't just implement everything all at once. You can't expect everyone to jump on board and be familiar and comfortable with the advancing technology. So I think trying to be as progressive as as technology is, trying to keep up with it, that's probably the hardest thing to do in our environment. Like I said, because I want us to be able to use, we're still using paper with some things back in the clinic area, and there's ways to implement it, to implement a digital solution back there. But it's one of those things I want to do it today, and I know it's one of those things that we just have to slowly implement. So the implementation of new technology, that's probably the most, maybe not the most troublesome, but the most frustrating thing for me.
Gotcha. Jack, anything to add to that?
I would. It's a great point, Jason, because what's interesting is your IT people. This is really about change management, right? It's really about adoption of technology, and your IT people are the closest to the technology, see the benefits, but it's not in their wheelhouse to be the change agents, right? They're solution delivery. Your management team has to be the change agents, but if they don't see the value in it, then Jason's sitting here saying, why aren't you using this? And so it takes a partnership between your IT department and your managing departments to get things off the ground. It's kind of sits alongside of that, necessity is the mother of invention. Even if they've got a problem, sometimes Jason has a tough time getting people to adopt because it's change,
right?
And change, there's psychological reasons for change, there's social reasons for change, and Jason is not that guy. He's not the truth sayer that can sit in a management meeting and convince everyone why it's a great idea to use this technology. It's like that's not his skill set. His skill set is to find the technology and put it into our hands, but the end user is the one that's got to own it, and that must be frustrating for him.
I think describing that as really a change management issue is an important one, right? Because I think we tend to forget that in technology. We're like, this is so obvious, right? And it may seem that way, but that that really discounts the human element that we're dealing with here, right? When it comes down to it, and never underestimate the devil, right? People can complain bitterly about a particular system or way of doing something. That doesn't mean that they're going to be all ready to, and gung ho to try something that they don't know, that's uncertain in their mind. That's just, that's the nature of people. If it were easier, I guess everybody would do it. So maybe that's the only thing positive I can think of to say about that. So, let's take one step up a little bit. So, kind of given the complexity of IT and healthcare, and you guys are in especially areas, but it's still kind of fits under that same umbrella. What do you guys see as the biggest challenge for providers like Tennessee Retina in the near future? Is that it could be finding great people, it could be technology, it could be regulation. What are the, there could be a lot of tailwinds helping your business. What's a significant headwind or a fear of a sort of potential challenge for trying to be successful, kind of again at the industry level? So maybe take specialty medicine as a retina specialist as an example, since that's your world. Jack, why don't you go first?
Boy, I have done a lot of thinking about this because we see in other industries where they have market disruptors. They come in, like retail, for example, right? Like Walmart was a market disruptor at one point, but now people are like, Walmart, you shop at Walmart? Like I go to Amazon, right? And then who knows what they have an iterative market disruption. What's weird about healthcare is that while they love to talk about market disruptors, the healthcare, it's very static. I mean, as you see it evolve over the decades, healthcare is entrenched, right? It's protected somewhat. It's got a huge, at a national level, there's a lot of political reasons why they don't want it to change. What I think is one thing that I watch is technology being a disruptor in the healthcare setting. because we've delivered so much technology to the end customer, the patient, that it seems like someone should be able to come in and go, healthcare is a commodity, or healthcare is a service, just like getting your taxes done. And whether you decide to go to H&R Block or whether you go to what are the other providers, I don't know, local CPA firm or whatever, like it's a service and you just pay for that service and then you go on. And I see some inroads to using technology to be able to empower the purchasing decisions. But the challenge is the insurance industry and the healthcare industry has such a stranglehold on how services are delivered that technology is having a really tough time breaking into that barrier. Look, for example, transportation industry, when you talk about Uber, for example, look at how quickly that technology placed in users. Like, I haven't taken a cab in decades or years, right? So, but in healthcare, no one's coming out there and saying, let me put the technology in your hand and you're just going to go out and shop, find it, and go and get that service at the price that you want. If you don't like that price, you move on. But there are so many other influences that keep this gridlock going.
And it was interesting during COVID, during the pandemic, right, was there was a lot of gnashing of teeth about, being able to do a virtual visit with the doctor, right, to see if you had a sore throat or whatever. And I think for the average healthcare consumer, you're like, you're kidding me. I'm gonna get on the phone for someone. I'm gonna get on a web meeting for a doctor for 15 minutes for them to say, ask me a couple of questions about the same thing I do if I was sitting in a doctor's office, urgent care visit. And that's like a big deal. Like, I think for most people, they're kind of like, why the hell haven't we been doing this already, right? And the reason is because of what you're just talking about, right? It's not easy. You can't just do that, right? I mean, you can, but you might get hammered, or it will have to be everybody paying out of pocket, right? It'd be like, the old, what was the surgery, not implants, but what they did, it was initially RK where they did the fix your vision, laser, LASIK. Yeah. That was all, insurance didn't pay for that. And so it became this, it was an area where technology had a big impact, right? And the price went down and all that kind of stuff, right? And I don't know if you could do that for everything, but it is sort of an interesting use case for, at least for a particular type of healthcare that operated a little bit differently outside the system. So, anyway, maybe that's a good note to wrap on as we think about, kind of the sort of bigger picture from the industry itself. As I told you guys, I always like to wrap with kind of a personal question, just to close us out. So, start with you, Jason. First question. Tell us something that you've watched or read lately that you think others ought to check out.
I watched the first 2 episodes of The Last of Us on HBO, and it's good. And it's crazy because I've tried to watch Walking Dead probably 4 or 5 times, and I never can get past the first episode. This one is, and its storyline similar, but for some reason I was just taken into it. So yeah, I'm hooked.
Last of Us. All right, Jack, how about you?
Oh gosh, well, I love documentaries because I don't want to be entertained. I want to learn. And so most of the times I watch documentaries. I watched this documentary on one of the streaming services, and it was something about like how cell phones are killing us. And it was a scientific documentary about how cell phone frequencies affect living organisms. And the fact that I didn't know this, but the world actually has a frequency, a resonance that the magnetic field works off of, and that our human brains, the way that our minds are constructed, we vibrate off that same frequency. And so we see these people who can't be near radio towers, can't be in areas. There's this place up in West Virginia, it's like a high speed, spook area, and people live within a certain number of miles around there because cell phone towers and any kind of radio towers are prohibited. And it's like going back into the 1800s. And the other thing, when they talk about who killed the bees or why aren't the honeybees coming back again, there was this study in England where they put a cell phone, no, not a cell phone, a portable phone inside of one beehive. And then there were like 5 other beehives. And then they counted the return rate on the bees coming back to the hives. They would, smoke them all out, and then they'd come back over time. And it was dramatically different. None of the bees wanted to go back into the hive that had that in there. And so I find it really fascinating because I think there are things that we are doing to ourselves that we don't understand the science behind it, but we think it's really good for business. And so let's put let's put let's put a radio transponder into this device and then carry it with you 24 hours a day, put it 18 inches from your head when it's sleeping at night. And then people have health problems and they just don't understand why. So I thought that was fascinating. Look for it on one of the streaming services. Like I said, I think it's, cell phones are killing us, or, cell phone causes cancer or something like that. And it's fascinating.
A non-provocative name is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Last question.
Also has a very interesting take on the moon landing. So
on the what?
On the moon landing.
Yeah, I still want to see what's on the dark side of the moon. I still believe there's something up there, but
it's made in a Hollywood basement. That's right. So, all right, last question. What is the most amazing medical intervention you've ever witnessed or been around? Doesn't have to be a life-saving intervention, although it could be. There's maybe bonus points for that. But medical intervention that you've witnessed or been around. Jason,
there was a case, I believe it was in Vanderbilt, where they used a patient had a traumatic eye injury, and they lost the capsular bag that held the natural lens of the eye, and so the surgeon was able to use a piece of bone from the patient, and I can't remember where they got it from, but they used a piece of bone, basically hollowed it out, made a circle, sutured it into the eye, behind the iris in the place of the capsular bag, placed the intraocular lens in there, and the patient was able to regain quite a bit of sight after that injury. So I thought that was kind of out of the box thinking. But when you think about it, to put something into the center of the eye, that's one of the first places the body's going to look to inject. So
sure.
You've got to have something in the body's not going to reject. And to use their own bone in that manner, I thought was really cool. So I thought that was some really outside the box thinking. I'm sure the patient appreciated it as well.
I'd say so. Jack?
Yeah, I don't know that it's any one single thing. One of the things Tennessee Retina is well known for is we are, nationally renowned for doing clinical research trials. And I'm really interested to see what comes down the pipe when it comes to genetic materials being able to be, cells being able to be injected into the subretina, and then those cells actually help heal the eye. And it's very fascinating to think that we won't have to inject these pharmacological agents that we put into the eye, that somehow we can put stem cells into the eye, or however they adapt the cells, and that the body can basically repurpose those cells for a completely different purpose. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I know none of them have gotten through clinical trials yet, but we've definitely been involved in some of those, and the science behind it was way above. I apologize. The science is way above my knowledge level, but really cool to hear about.
Excellent. All right, guys. I think I've taken enough of your time. We'll wrap there and let you guys get back to work. Jack, Jason, thanks again for being on Cut the Shit. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for being a customer. I hope we're doing a good job. If we're not, call me after this and we'll talk. But outside of that, we really appreciate it. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, Bryan, thanks a lot so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @cuttheshit_pod. We are also on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.